25 years ago, there was nothing cooler than poetry. It was the most radical, empathetic art form. And there was nothing cooler than Def Poetry Jam. Featuring legends like Kanye West, Mos Def, Nikki Giovanni, and more, it was a portal into the highest form of revolutionary art. It was our only outlet for truth when protest was seen as a thing of the past. Men could be soft-spoken and articulate. Women could be fearlessly sophisticated. This doorway showed us all what was possible via true liberation. Kevin Koval and Roger Banera-Gard, as featured deaf poets, were superheroes to us. There was no Twitter to universalize suffering via only the power of the word. There was just poetry, and we worshiped its capacity to save the planet. I myself had become a problem child. Intellectually restless, bullied by an unbalanced older brother, I was on the edge of expulsion when Koval walked into our class to promote young Chicago authors and recruit students. That marked a turning point for me. A student with 6 out-of-school suspensions in 6th grade alone. When I wrote a chapbook of poems for our poetry unit, coupled with winning essay contests, it saved me from getting kicked out and gave me purpose. Imagine telling parents then that grown poets would be abusing their child's future friends. I did my first poetry slam competition at 12 years old. Before the Young Chicago Authors Annual Poetry Slam Louder Than a Bomb would enjoy the media attention of peak YCA. NPR tie-ins, celebrity judges, mayors in the audience. It was simply us and the word against the world.
We trusted Young Chicago Authors. We needed it. The most important organization in the world as the new millennium started. It gave us black superstars like Chance the Rapper and made popular culture more utopian, redefined the wokeness for a whole generation. Yet its staff suppressed sexual misconduct allegations for years, leading to the ouster of co-founder Kevin Koval. What exactly happened and where are they today? This is the Fall of YCA.
As I got to high school, it felt like the energy of my Keller classmates infused the festival with new life. Sydney and Kiki, who recruited me, also were part of the Kuumba Links community organization. They infused the scene with life as people who did these kinds of events day in, day out, not just once a year. Poetry, not as a hobby, but a lifestyle. Poetry as music, poetry as dance, poetry as fashion, health, revolution. Poetry made getting up worth it, made your worst failures and fears into beautiful triumph. This is what it meant to have a voice. We weren't just reading off paper. We were breathing life into the universe. It grew. Then they started shooting a movie based on our poetry slam, also named Louder Than a Bomb. Nate, a kid I'd went to elementary school with, was one of the stars. Another Keller kid. Adam Gottlieb, who I would later write a poetry book with, was another. After rave reviews from critics all over, the film was soon noted by none other than Oprah Winfrey. We got to see her introduce and celebrate our art on her television channel, OWN. It was surreal, yet it felt earned. Our stories were important. Our storytelling, even more so. It was special. Our slam community became the hub for a cultural phenomenon. We were the faces of a true youth-led revolution. It felt like we were sages, wise beyond our years, as if the impacts of our words would be felt for eras to come. Wise or not, we still were just kids. We still needed to be protected. Yet our teachers bore little responsibility for the pain we projected. More often than not, it was the process itself that was seen as the peak. No follow-ups or trigger warnings, just regulations restricting profanity and an overall vibe that, hey, we like people of color and women. You would never think of this poetry scene as a place where sexual violence could happen, much less proliferate undetected or actively suppressed. But by 2010, community pillar, YCA educator, and internationally acclaimed author Roger Banera-Gard had already published poetry on his personal blog about having committed rape. A wolf in plain sight. On stage, we loved his so-called raw energy. We felt the undertones, and we trusted that his displays of passion were that of an ancestral protector, not a predator. As a man, he seemed to have been everything I had aspired to. We would trade videos of his and other spoken word artists like baseball cards, studying cadences of the legends. Come home with bags full of their books to study like the word of gods. We didn't buy drugs, we copped poetry CDs. It was a thriving ecosystem, and it was perfect. So it seemed. In this era, poet and advocate Nikki Patan had already began to have the experiences behind the scenes at YCA that led to her later starting Surviving the Mic, a survivor-centered poetry collective and event series. She reported inappropriate behavior from an educator to director Kevin Koval and found that her claims were not taken seriously. Not only that, she began to be frozen out of opportunities in the community. This pattern would also befall me, simply a teenager finding myself via art in the coming years. Poetry Slam, the lifeblood of YCA, was a recent invention. There was a story about its creator, Chicago Mark Smith, that was used as a familiar spiel before every bout. How he had only intended to entertain construction workers and ended up fostering this, the definitive literary genre by the turn of millennium. We got to not only hear about his venue, the Green Mill, but also see Mark at our youth slams. For purposes of worship and guidance, Koval will also bring in ex-Weather Underground provocateur Bill Ayers as his honored guest on many occasions. This would later become somewhat controversial to mainstream media pundits, but to us, it was incredible beyond belief to actually meet counterculture icons in the flesh. We all thought one day it'd be us. In the era preceding so-called wokeness, we were wide awake. Soon after the Louder Than a Bomb documentary blew up, HBO would present their own show, Brave New Voices, based off the National Youth Slam. Our movement was going global. Another subject of the Louder Than a Bomb documentary was the team Steinmetz. They were the West Side underdogs of the film, at a school in the neighborhood famous for disinvestment and subsequent violence. Contrasted with Flights of Fancy from Northsiders, Steinmetz's climactic piece was about youth caught in generational trauma from gun violence. Featuring larger-than-life characters like Big C, the de facto leader of the group was Lamar Jordan, who we'll also cover later. And as their team and influence on the scene grew, there was a younger kid who came up, Malcolm London. 'Cause By the fall of 2013, we started hearing several conversations about sexual violence in the spoken word community. At the National Poetry Slam, there were tales of people hissing at a poet on stage who was known to be an abuser. At local poetry events in Chicago, we saw poems about rape within our art scene. In August, we read a Facebook post that named young Chicago author's mentor Roger Banera-Gard as a rapist. This came as a shock to many of the youth who were under his care. People didn't know how to react. Many conversations were held in private. As a community leader, people expected YCA to address the issue publicly, especially as an employer of Roger. That never happened. In October, a group of 8 young teaching artists in Chicago, including Malcolm London, Jamila Woods, Fatima Asghar, Adam Dev C. Levin, and Plus Side, gathered to discuss their concerns. After sharing our mixed feelings, we decided to brainstorm a list of demands that would shape the type of poetry community we wanted to create. These demands included ways for YCA to create a safer space by establishing a code of conduct for mentors and teaching artists, hiring a counselor to be available at YCA programs, and steps for taking action when breaches of safety occur. When we tried to schedule another meeting to finish the list of demands, we were unable to find a time that worked for everyone. Suddenly, all communication in the group chat went silent for months. At the end of December, we were finally able to meet again with a smaller group. We decided to write a letter accompanying the list of demands, both of which we sent out in February. We sent the letter and list of demands to Rebecca Hunter, Executive Director of YCA, and Kevin Koval, the organization's artistic director. Over 20 poets signed on to the letter, including current and former YCA employees and students, along with other members of Chicago's poetry community. We demanded YCA release a public statement by the end of Louder Than a Bomb Festival in March, and organize some sort of community event, such as a reading or workshop, that addressed the issue of sexual assault. We received 2 email responses from Hunter. In the emails, Hunter emphasized that YCA was keeping their process internal, with intentions to open up the conversation in the future. After more silence from YCA, we sent a follow-up letter in late March, detailing our dissatisfaction with their lack of public response. After threatening to go to the media if a public statement was not released, Kevin and Rebecca met with trans poet H. Melt and myself in the spring of 2014. At the meeting, Kevin and Rebecca stated that they were the only 2 people with all of the information regarding the situation. Rebecca asked us outright if we thought YCA knew about Roger's behavior beforehand. Given Kevin's considerable prominence in the national poetry scene, Roger's history of allegations stretching back at least a decade from Chicago to Michigan to New York and perhaps beyond, and the rumors of Roger grooming young women in our scene, we found it very hard to believe that Kevin was not aware. They assured us of their prior ignorance. They also claimed that the survivors did not want the allegations made public. However, we'd been in contact with survivors who told us that this is not true. Fatima herself was one. Hunter also claimed that YCA contacted their partners to inform them of the situation. A few weeks later, we came across a Facebook post that showed Roger inviting a teacher to an LTAB Poetry Slam event at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. At the end of that meeting, Kevin and Rebecca once again assured H. Melt and I that they intended to open up the conversation to the community in the future. In late June, we were contacted about a second staff meeting being held and facilitated by Circle Keepers to discuss Roger and steps for moving forward and possibly involving the community. At the end of that meeting, the development of a statement and comprehensive organizational response was again promised. This meeting was the first YCA directors had had with staff since the initial one in February. Only 2 staff members were present. They had taken no public accountability. In 2015, when I released this info in a statement, initially co-authored with Jamila, Fatima, whom I didn't know was a survivor of Roger, and H. Melt, young Chicago authors had made no public acknowledgement of the fact that they employed a person accused of being a serial rapist over the course of several years.
They had taken no public accountability. Anything that could be considered transparency had only come as a result of our repeated inquiry. Friends of ours and mentees of Roger did not know what happened. They just knew that something happened. Many of them expressed doubt at the accusers and maintained their serious emotional attachment to Roger, even while acknowledging that he should take responsibility for what happened. Roger continued to find work with kids in the city, show up to events, and be awarded on a local and national level for his art. Thankfully, a few institutions around the city did take bigger steps to ban Roger. Poet and rapper Eric Sirota wrote about the dissonance of venues refusing to ban abusers, inspired by Roger Banera-Garde, via the piece For Poets Who Apologize from the Microphone. The full piece can be found in Eric's new book, The Rent Eats First, published by Button Poetry. Still, Roger was a youth nonprofit director for almost another decade, constantly partnering with young Chicago authors. During this time, like Nikki Patan before me, I had opportunities taken away, as YCA elites retaliated. I spoke about this at an open discussion Nikki held about abuse in the scene. Was quoted by the Chicago Reader. A year later, I would be in the Reader again for my work giving free workshops and accountability processes surrounding sexual violence. I emailed all my poetry peers, hoping they would be proactive. It never happened. I would just get blocked, muted, and talked about behind closed doors. YCA teaching artists like B. Capri texted me telling me I couldn't perform if I talked about Roger. After a mediation with Kevin Koval, I started the YCA program Queeriosity, alongside my fellow former whistleblowers Fatima, Jamila, and H-Melt. However, H-Melt and I were fired at the end of our 2-year pilot, the only non-tenured teaching artists, the only folks who kept organizing around YCA harm. Is it because of Roger? H-Melt asked Jamila and Nate Marshall, sobbing. After later negotiations, just I was let go. The person whose prior testimony had forced the first public statement from young Chicago authors concerning this. I stopped talking to H-Melt and the gang, though we did one last show at the Promontory. Even as I tried to move on, YCA folks were everywhere. I was recognized by Roger's partner with their kids at the Shed Aquarium. She was happy to see me. Younger co-workers at the Museum of Contemporary Art had seen me at open mics. A young black woman I'd been working with for one of my festivals cornered me in my DMs, saying I ignored her request for a private conversation. I was burned out from doing mediations, and yet she demanded I call out RJL, who is an event photographer at the Promontory in Hyde Park, and a YCA teaching artist. She was the 4th woman I'd been informed of him harming. I amplified her call out and got blocked by even more black women, like Jasmine Barber and DJ Bonita Appleblunt, who I personally supported for years. I recommended folks employing RJ do workshops for the public to process harm. Some did, some didn't. In a sad turn of events, Malcolm London, who flaked on our first activism group to go to a baby shower for Roger, would become a political martyr after being arrested at police protests. Then, black women London had harmed spoke up. Did the younger generation do any better at holding one of its own accountable? Continually failed by its elders? No. A cycle of abuse passed itself down generationally, causing harm well into the next decade, the 2020s. This is the fall of YCA. Chance the Rapper was the first notable black man to call Tory Lanez out on behalf of Megan Thee Stallion, following fellow YCA artist Noname's public provocation towards black men. Chano then replied under his own tweet to also call out his and Noname's friend Malcolm London. Survivors in the young Chicago authors community had been in uproar about Malcolm since leftists rallied around London after he was again arrested at a protest. The loud media frenzy to get Malcolm London out of jail again was grimly ironic given the completely silent follow-up from these same parties after he was outed by even more rape survivors. Hollywood actress India Moore, Malcolm's new romantic partner, wasn't giving speeches in front of our city institutions anymore. There were no news reporters, singer Jamila Woods and famed intersex activist Pigeon Pagonis weren't posted up with signs. Let Us Breathe's Damon Williams wasn't hugging Malcolm, surrounded by press photographers in front of a barricade of supporters. It was just silent. The same silence that allowed Malcolm and his mentor Roger Banera to continue to be welcomed into space after space of young people they could abuse as their friends generated millions of dollars over the next few years. The organizations they worked with all supposedly had feminist frameworks for transformative justice, yet they failed to act. In 2020, at the height of the Defund the Police movement, people looked for a lasting example of what to do when harm occurs. The YCA community and the activists surrounding it failed us. The Malcolm London accountability process was abandoned as folks such as noname and educator Mariam Kaba, who led the process, continued to point fingers at cops and do panels about how much better their politics were than everyone else without solving their own problems. Artists, including many of those mentioned, have been blackballing me for years as I continue to do the work of holding Malcolm, Roger, and their enablers accountable. I wrote essays, participated in poetry panels, and did interviews about the toll this took on me, most recently starting a petition which would then lead to a fundraiser for survivors. However, as the COVID pandemic raged on, I've been unable to engage folks in person for this cause. With my network inert and/or being rebuilt from scratch, the means of justice are elusive. Women have since given up entirely on the ideas of transformative or restorative justice. Defund the Police has reverted to kill all abusers, as online posts celebrate events such as Tory Lanez nearly being stabbed to death in jail. Meanwhile, Malcolm London is busy performing at Martin Luther King Jr. Day events and winning Emmys. Our call to action is simple. 1. To facilitate accountability via public, open conversation with those who have enabled or suppressed abuse, as originally requested by the survivors. And 2. To restore those survivors via a community fund. This is how we can all heal from violence and transform justice. Working at the Shed Aquarium near the turn of the decade, the most shocking incident for me was being recognized by the mother of Roger Banera children. She was genuinely happy to see me, remembered me as a youth poet, a testament to my positive impact on the community. I had no idea who she was, yet it made me feel extremely exposed, as did seeing activist Charles Preston, someone I felt sure would have seen important organizers screaming at me online the winter before, former best friends calling me insane as if I was delusionally harassing them because I made a thread saying that this abuse was happening and had claimed that calling it out had harmed me professionally. Not to mention the younger sister of one of my high school slam teammates was my coworker at the Shed Aquarium, was in my training class and everything. We had a lot in common and good rapport, but in 2020, she was still surrounded by peers I knew were facilitating abuse. She's enjoyed all sorts of media attention like many others in the YCA orbit, and I envy that, of course, but it's just one of a million important real connections I'm denied. Another friendship deferred, more work destroyed. My following place of work, Gardeneers, used a Kevin Koval book in our training and would play noname and Jamila Woods' music during work. YCA was like the Justice League to them, and we were made to be their worshipers. I remember squirming desperately, wanting to leave as a guest speaker kept praising Kevin Koval well past his allotted time slot. After COVID hit, I found my footing coordinating Gardeneer's social media and spearheading digital education. The best thing was being inspired to start our food forest on 79th as part of our programming for youth at home. to put food justice into domestic practice, especially as the civil rights movement flared back up. We met in digital groups, and I came into contact with a leading farmer who could help me develop the curriculum needed to help kids grow their own food forests. This would have been perfect, but she was close with aforementioned Malcolm London supporter Pigeon. Pigeon, who came into YCA because I started Queeriosity, which I started after a mediation with Kevin Koval that occurred after calling YCA out due to their lack of accountability concerning Roger. Pigeon, whose career soared after they made the connections in my space, was now encroaching on another of mine, one that I tried to use to escape from where I'd been. Pigeon was not only working closely with this garden leader, but lived down the street from kids that I was co-instructing to start a growing space on the west side. So as my closest peer and advocate at Gardeneers naturally started to connect us, I had to distance myself. But I couldn't say why. I couldn't say this person, who is a famous activist, supported Malcolm London, yet isn't speaking up about him being a serial rapist, and I'm calling out their best friends, so it was too big of a convo. They involved that person in our curriculum as a guest educator. I stopped checking in so I wouldn't have to confront Pigeon. They were more famous and powerful. I just became more and more disassociated from everything that I'd built with Gardeneers. How could I tell my new nonprofit coworkers that there's these rapists running around via a deep-seated conspiracy and expect them to back me up? How can I move on from years of this abuse, leading to me being physically assaulted during lockdown while living somewhere I wouldn't even have been if I could have enjoyed the same profitable opportunities as the people that I came up with? There is only reparations and open conversation. Our organization is thankful to support a better way. This documentary is thankful to support a better way. We use our hashtags YCA Harm and YCA Convo because there's honestly too many ways to name this impact in one sitting. I personally barely even check DMs online anymore because of threatening negative messages. People wanted to isolate me, and it worked. They wanted my health to suffer, and it has. They wanted to destroy my career. They can't. The only person who reached out to me, my mentor, Sydney, from elementary school and high school and beyond, died a couple years ago. I didn't even go to her funeral because of the accumulated grief of YCA Harm, the fear of our mutual friends who turned on me, and seeing it, the idea of it. I myself could die any moment because of how my health has suffered, due to the prolonged effects of isolation and quarantine. The YCA Open Convo and Survivor Fund need you. This story of our reality sense louder than a bomb won't be complete until we get this right. The Black Lives Matter movement failed to heal racism because activists didn't present a case of abolition working. Noname spoke out against Tory Lanez instead of her own friend Malcolm London and reverted the status quo back to prison because she wasn't ready to do the work. I've written about this before, how Noname killed the revolution. YCA Harm also killed my relationships. Eventually, my former friend and co-worker Fatima Asghar came out as another survivor of Roger Bernera Guard, years after abandoning our work holding young Chicago authors accountable and not telling me why. This was enough to get Kevin Koval and Rebecca Hunter fired. The Louder Than a Bomb Festival was renamed and one of my high school poetry slam teammates, Demetrius Amperan, took over. YCA partner org Freewrite, which had employed both Roger and Malcolm London, shut down. No one else who has helped facilitate Roger and Malcolm's impunity has been disciplined, or had to speak on why they helped blackball those who had been doing this work. No survivors have been reimbursed for years of harm. Prison exists without an alternative, and rapists roam free of consequence, as survivors, whistleblowers, and advocates still suffer. This is the fall of YCA.